For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started. All right, guys, here we go. It's the round 2, the rematch, the sequel between David Neff and NephilimFree. And they are debating, that's right, guys, the global flood. It's Battle of the Neffs. And I am pumped. The much anticipated sequel, I should point out. Now, before we break the ice, before I bring in our debaters and our guests for the night, okay, I'm going to go over a couple announcements because we've got another packed week next week, okay? We've got Professor David McQueen's going to be back with us Wednesday to discuss diamonds and the age of the earth, okay? Followed by a big debate on morality between Derek Barnes and Matt Slick, okay? That's going to be at night. It is going to be at 9:30 EST, okay? So that's definitely going to be one to remember. Also, later in the week, we have John McKay, the creation guy, back with us to discuss the flood. And as always, we're going to have an open Q&A with the audience. So bring your questions, your objections, your criticisms, and we're going to have some fun, okay? We've also got another few interviews, discussions, debates planned in the future too. But until I get an exact day and time, we'll announce those in the future. So enough for me. You guys didn't come here to see me. You came here to see the debaters, the stars of the show. So I'm going to bring them in here. We've got David Neff and NephilimFree. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for giving us your time. This is the rematch, the sequel. We're excited. So thanks again, gentlemen.
Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you, NephilimFree, for agreeing to debate me one more time.
Thank you.
So, all right. Real quick, what we'll do is we'll break the ice. We'll hand it to the debaters to give a brief intro of themselves. Although they're no stranger to debates, they've both been on this channel numerous times. So a couple of our fan favorites. But I'm going to go over the format real quick, okay? So we've got 10-minute opening statements, followed by an uninterrupted 5-minute rebuttal, okay? An open dialogue. We're going to keep it respectful, cordial, try and keep it on one topic at a time and as equally timed as possible, okay? Followed by concluding statements. We'll wrap up the points. And always, we're going to have an audience Q&A. So please tag me with your questions at Standing for Truth so I don't miss them. We've already got nearly 40 people in the chat, so it should be a big night. Therefore, I don't want to miss any of your awesome questions. Enough for me, guys. Thanks for being here. We'll start with Neff, as in NephilimFree. A little bit about yourself. What's going on at your channel? Yeah, go ahead. Floor is yours.
Oh, well, my name is Evan. I go by NephilimFree. I've been doing Christian creationist apologetics for about 13 years. I opened my YouTube channel in 2007. I love to debate. That's my one of my hobbies. And the subject is a really big, important one to me. Christianity versus the rest of the world. As for truth, which one is true? And I enjoyed discussing all manner of subjects related to it, to worldviews. And I'm really pleased to be here debating tonight with David. And it's going to be a good time.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Neff. Thanks for giving us your time. This will definitely be one to remember. For anybody who is new to this channel, because I want to point out we've had a lot of new subscribers since your first round, your first match. So please, if you love this debate, I'm sure you are going to. You've also got a round one you can check out as well in debates hosted by SFT playlist. You'll find nearly 100 debates there for the debate addict, which I think we all are debate addicts. So David Neff, thanks for being here. A little bit about yourself, what's going on over at your channel, so on and so forth. Floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Once again, thank you, NephilimFree, for agreeing to have this debate with me. So I'm David Neff. I am an upcoming student at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Fall 2021, I will be studying biological science and specifically working with the molecular cellular developmental biology, which I am very fascinated with. I enjoy discussing religion, science, and philosophy. And so there will be an after show, and it's also going to be a little bit of a socially distanced birthday party. My 26th birthday party. I just turned 26 this past Tuesday, and that means NephilimFree is going to have the honor tonight of giving me the customary birthday spankings.
Well, happy birthday, David.
Well, thank you.
Happy 26th birthday. And you're going to be 26 all year, David. You're going to be 26 all year.
Yep.
So enjoy it.
And that means Nephilim, that means you're going to go easy on me tonight, right?
Yes. The least you can do for your birthday, right?
Actually, I am, because there's a million things I could bring up and discuss. I've limited what I'm going to talk about to some very narrow subject matter. So, yeah.
Well, same here. I'm going to be very narrow myself and stick to the topic of genetics.
Awesome. Well, let's not give away too much, guys. We want to keep this a bit of a surprise. So let's go right into NephilimFree. He is going to start. Actually, am I mistaken? We're starting with Neff, right?
I thought I was going first.
Okay.
No,
yeah.
David Neff is going first.
Okay.
He said he wanted to.
In the pre-show, I picked a number in my head, and David got it closer. So we're going to start with David. You got roughly 10 minutes. We're easy going. I'll give you a 1-minute warning, but I'm not just going to shut you off right at the 10-minute mark. Just know at the 1-minute warning, start winding it down a bit, and then we'll give NephilimFree equal time. So here we go.
Yep. All right.
Let me share your screen for you.
Excellent. And it's so yep.
You're
Excellent.
good. You're good.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much once again for hosting this debate. So let's take a look quickly at the biblical timeline. Creation happened around 4004 BCE. The flood happened around 2348 BCE. Tower of Babel about 160 years afterwards, and Moses in the Exodus about 857 years afterwards. So let's look at the creationist model. Well, actually, before we do that, I want to kind of discuss some of the philosophy of science and the scientific method. The first step in the scientific method is to make an observation. The second step is ask a question. The third is to form a hypothesis or a testable explanation. Then we make a prediction based upon the hypothesis. Then we test that prediction, and then we use that result to make new hypotheses and predictions. So I want to talk a little bit about falsification, which is very important in science. When we make a hypothesis, we are making a couple of predictions. If and only if my hypothesis were true, then we should observe A, B, and C. If and only if my hypothesis were true, then we should never observe X, Y, and Z. If you were a scientist, what would you want to test first? What do you want to see? What do you want to test A, B, and C first, or do you want to test X, Y, and Z? Well, you want to test X, Y, and Z first, because that would falsify your hypothesis. So if the flood model is true, if the flood actually did happen and the Earth is young, what should we expect to find? But more importantly, what should we never expect to find? So now I'm going to get into some of the flood models that Answers to Genesis and others have proposed. According to Answers to Genesis and most creationists, that Noah took kinds and not species. And there are 2 kinds of unclean animals and 7 kinds of clean animals. And according to Answers to Genesis, 1,500 to 7,000 animals total, 7,000 being the worst case scenario. Now, there's an obvious problem. How do you generate enough people to build the Tower of Babel in 106 years? And how do you generate the extant biodiversity in under 400 years? And of course, warning, you know me quite well, we're going to do the math. So let's calculate extant biodiversity. Mammal species about 6,400, bird species 10,000, 8,200 species reptiles, 900,000 insects, arachnids 60,000 species, and in total about 984,600 species. And this is just extant species. So how many new species would you have to generate per day? Well, Abraham lived 350 years post-flood. By this time, most of the extant biodiversity has been found in art or literature, so we are limiting ourselves basically to 400 years to generate the modern biodiversity. So as it turns out, it'll be roughly 2831 species per year, or about 7 new species per day, which is biologically impossible. And of course, that's only extant biodiversity and not extinct biodiversity. So there are a couple core genetic predictions that this model makes. If and only if this hypothesis are true, what should we expect in the genome? We should expect a 4,300-year most recent common ancestor with severe detectable bottlenecks. Humans would be emerging in the Middle East, and all populations of humans and all animals would be severely inbred. So let's do test number 1, the most recent common ancestor. The most recent common ancestor is, of course, the most recent individual where all members of the population directly descend. We can calculate this for both the mitochondrial and the Y DNA, for both the mitochondrial and the Y DNA. So how is the time to most recent common ancestor is calculated? Well, if you've been following the genes and saga between myself and Dr. Dan, you might know that it is determined based on long-term mutation accumulation rates based upon known divergent times. And we can calculate the divergent times of most divergent samples, and our results of the most recent common ancestor for humans being about 300,000 years ago. Calculations can and have been done for existing species. For example, the cat species started to diverge between 6 to 10 million years ago, and that alone is enough to falsify the flood model. But let's go on to test number 2. So the test out of 2 is going to be the out of Middle East prediction. And you have to know a little bit of a thing or two about the founder effect. So when populations start to migrate, when you have small populations that migrate from the main population, they take only a little bit of the genetic diversity. And as you can see here with this illustration here, the migrated populations are less genetically diverse than the main population. So the creationist prediction, we would see something like this, where the genome should show a Middle East origins, and the Middle East would have the most genetic diversity, and by extension, they would have the highest rate of heterozygosity. So now let's look at the results. We can trace the mitochondrial DNA and the Y DNA back to Africa. This is what we actually see. Africa has the largest genetic diversity and the largest rates of heterozygosity. Non-African genetics is represented as a subset of African genetics, which means irrefutably that this is a result of that the common ancestor was African, not Middle East. And the oldest hominid fossils are also found in the Middle East. So, conclusion, humans emerged in Africa, not the Middle East. Test 2 falsifies the flood model. Test number 3 is the bottleneck. In a bottleneck, you have the original population sharply reduced, and the surviving population has much reduced genetic diversity. We can actually see this in the genome, and this is an illustration directly from Ancestor-Genesis. This is what is predicted, where you have a very sharp reduction in biodiversity and a sharp reduction in the genetic variations. Now, all eukaryotic mammals and land animals are diploid, meaning that we have 2 sets of chromosomes one from each parent, and so the maximum number of alleles possible in 2 diploid individuals is 4. So test number 3 results: no genome shows a severe genetic bottleneck 4,300 years ago. So conclusion: science is based upon falsification. The flood failed 3 major genetic tests. Henceforth, we can safely falsify the flood model. Thank you very much.
All right, David, let me close the screen. Okay, yeah, you had a few minutes to spare. Therefore, what we'll do is we'll throw it into the open dialogue, and we'll hand it over to NephilimFree. You have up to 10 minutes. Whatever you don't use, we'll throw into the open dialogue as well. But go ahead, Neph, if you need me to share screen or anything, just let me know.
Okay. Yeah, there's one thing I want to share on the screen. Let me see if I can get that pulled up real quick. I won't need 10 minutes. Let's see here. Okay, pulling it up now. Okay, I should be screen sharing something now.
Yep.
Okay. So, David, first you made an assumption about the arrival of species. You said that mutation. You alluded that genetic mutation produces the arrival of species, but this chart, based on scientific data about the effects of random genetic mutation changing single nucleotides, is produced by world-class famous geneticist Dr. Jonathan Sanford. And he shows that to get 2 nucleotides side by side to change by genetic mutation, just 2, you need 1.5 million years. So the idea of the arrival of an entire new species by random mutation, the creation of entire genes de novo, is absurdity. You need more time than the history of the universe to create a single species. Therefore, evolution is impossible, scientifically impossible, cannot have happened, because the rate of mutation is outrageously too slow for mutation to generate new structural designs, new anatomical features to arise so that a fundamentally new species arises. It can never happen. You would need hundreds of times the age of the universe for this to happen. To get a beetle from a non-beetle would require hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of years, likely tens of billions of years. So that can't be true. Now, you said also genetic diversity. You mentioned the out of Africa thing. You acknowledged that the genetic diversity of people in Africa is greater than it is than for Slavics, Native Americans, Europeans, et cetera, et cetera. And that is true. However, if what you're not thinking about is this contradicts evolution theory, because evolution claims that random genetic mutation builds genetic diversity. That's how new creatures, come into being. Fundamentally new species arise by increasing genetic variability. Genetic diversity is created allegedly by random mutations as selected by nature, natural selection. Okay, but that can't be true, because if Africans had more genetic diversity in them than the peoples that came out of Africa, if the evolution of man from out of Africa story were true, then evolution should be creating increased genetic diversity, and the tribes that came after the Africans should have increased genetic variety after the event you speak of, which was hundreds of thousands of years ago. So that contradicts evolution theory. It's funny, evolutionists don't talk about that, but it contradicts the very theory. It actually supports creation. Then, in fact, there are three basic genetic haplogroups of mankind and three basic Y male chromosomes that can be found globally through the tribes of mankind. And this has been verified by secular geneticists. And that would just happen to support the biblical account of the mankind, all the tribes of mankind, being the offspring of Shem, Japhet, and Ham, the three sons of Noah. Why would there be three basic male Y chromosomes and three genetic haplogroups at the basis of all of the diversity of mankind unless the biblical account of the Noahic flood is true and mankind got rebooted by the three sons of Noah, Shem, Japhet, and Ham? Because those three male Y chromosomes and those three genetic haplogroups are the offspring of Shem, Japhet, and Ham. So it lines up beautifully with the Bible. Before you talk about genetic diversity coming out of Africa, you should maybe give some thought to what evolution theory claims that genetic mutation does, which is to increase genetic variability so that new species with fundamentally new features, new anatomical designs arise. That requires increasing genetic variability and diversity. That's what evolution claims, you see, but your admission that there's more diversity in Africa than there is in the tribes that allegedly came from the Africans is an admission that evolution theory contradicts the actual scientific data. And that's all I have to say about that. That's the end of my rebuttal time.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for your opening statements, clear, concise, and the minutes left over, we'll just throw into the open dialogue, because now we are moving on to uninterrupted 5-minute rebuttals. Okay, this one we'll have to be a little more strict with. I'll set the timer. Once we hit the 4-minute mark, I'll give you a 1-minute warning just so you know to wind things down. And David Neff, the floor is yours. Whenever you're ready, let me know. I'll start.
Yeah, sure. But first, was that your entire opening arguments? Or was that just your rebuttal? Did you have any?
No, that was my rebuttal. I thought I got an opening statement. That was
okay.
just my
Yes.
5-minute rebuttal.
Okay,
So
yeah.
I got to have an opening statement as well coming?
Okay, yeah. So I'm sorry, I was confused. I thought.
Okay, so
maybe I'm confused about what happens here. I thought there was going to be a 10-minute opening statement, then a 5-minute thing,
Okay.
and then a 5-minute rebuttal, and then an opening statement and a 5-minute rebuttal, and then.
Okay, so you were kind of thinking about.
No, I didn't give my opening
Yeah.
Okay, here, let me jump in real quick. Okay, so that makes sense why Neff only went 5 minutes. So Neff, that was your rebuttal to David Neff's opening. Therefore, now David Neff gets a rebuttal to, well,
Right, he gets a 5-minute rebuttal, and then I get a 10-minute opening statement, and he gets a 5-minute rebuttal, right?
it probably would
Yeah.
have been best if it was opening statements, because now what's David Neff rebutting?
Okay.
You
Well,
didn't-
that's
Yeah.
fine.
So-
I'll just bring up the information I wanted to in our discussion. That's fine.
Well,
Let's just keep it rolling. That's fine.
Okay.
We'll go straight to the discussion period then, I guess, right?
Okay. Sure. So, do you still want to present your opening arguments for the flood?
Well,
Well,
let's do this,
I'll
guys.
present that, but we can do it during our open discussion, I guess.
Well, if I could, so we've had some recent debates actually with Bill Morgan and Cygnus Eustis was his name. We also did the same thing with Paul Price, Dr. Garrett. So we could structure it like this. NephilimFree just gave his 5-minute rebuttal. Now he can do his 10-minute opening. And then we go to David Neff, who gives a 5-minute rebuttal to that opening.
Yeah,
So
let's do that. And then
Yeah,
we'll
definitely.
have an
We'll go to
open
dialogue.
discussion.
Yeah, that sounds good, because I want to make sure you have plenty of time for that. So feel free to go ahead and do your opening arguments now.
Okay.
Here we go, gentlemen.
Okay, I'd like to screen share something. Can you see that I'm screen sharing SFT?
You're good to go.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so there is a million scientific evidences for the Noahic flood. If you want to prove to someone that the Noahic flood is a geological fact or historical fact, you can talk for hours. There are literally dozens upon dozens of physical geological features of the planet that scream of the Noahic flood. I'm just going to talk about maybe 2 or 3 tonight. So first, the theory of isostasy. So our isostatic equilibrium. Imagine you have these blocks of wood floating in the water. Because of the mass of it, the majority of the wood's going to sit below the water level if you put it in a bathtub or something, and a portion of it will rest above. If you put your finger on top of that block of water and pushed it down, it'll bob up and down, and each time it comes up and down, it comes up and down a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less, until it reaches this equilibrium, right, where it stops. And most of the blocks of wood, the same thing we see this with icebergs, right? An iceberg is a massive block of water. Most of the iceberg is underwater, and a small portion of it is on top. But it reaches what's called an isostatic equilibrium, right? I think this is a concept you can understand. The crust of the earth acts like the water, and mountains and massive thickness on the continents acts the same way. This is from the Encyclopedia Britannica, talking about the theory of isostasy right here. So they say that because the mantle is more fluid than the crust, mountains and high elevation lands have an isostasy to them. They bob and they go up and down. That's why some of the mountains in the Himalayas actually go up and down. Some of them are actually going down, and they'll be coming back up in a century or less. So, in fact, depending on the year, Mount Everest is not necessarily the tallest mountain on the earth. Did you know that? It's true, because the mountains are bobbing in the crust of the earth, trying to find isostatic equilibrium, because the crust is thinner and softer. I mean, the material below it than the crust. So now I just want to bring up one thing about isostasy. All the mountains of the earth are still reveling after the flood, and they're trying to find isostatic equilibrium. A very beautiful example of this, of what can happen in a catastrophic event, is the Kingston mountain range in southeastern California. Now, because mountains have a root, like this right here, or like this block of wood sitting in the water, a mountain has a root, and the largest percentage typically of a mountain is below the surface of the earth, and what you see sticking up is just the upper part. The root of the mountain is below the ground. It's below. Mountains have roots, and they attempt to achieve isostatic equilibrium. Now, the interesting thing about the Kingston Range in California is they don't have a root. The root for these mountains is 60 miles away. That's right. These mountains have been uprooted. The continent has shifted so fast by such incredible violence from the left to the right on your screen that the mountains were literally sheared off their route and pushed 60 miles away. Now, how do they know that that's the root of the mountain? Because they test the granite in it chemically, find the chemical signature of that granite. They found that exact chemical signature in a mountain root in the ground 60 miles away. So they know where they came from. 60 miles. Now think about what kind of catastrophic event can move a mountain off, a series of mountains, off their route, push them sideways 60 miles. Well, the flood of Noah could do it. You see, but a portion of the state of California rests on a separate Pacific plate, not on the North American plate. It's because it's been vibrated like something like I don't know if you've ever seen the 1960s, 70s football game, electric football, where you have a metal football field, little plastic football guys, and you press a button, and the whole field, the metal thing, it vibrates, bzzz, and the little players move around because of the vibration. That's what happened to the continent during the flood of Noah. Outrageously strong 16 or so rate earthquakes occurred while the continents were moving rapidly, and a portion of the state of California was literally brecciated and vibrated clean off the continental plate onto another. And when that happened, it took the top of the Kingston mountain range with it 60 miles away. Now, that can't happen during uniformitarianism. The only geologic event that can be imagined by man that could explain this would be the Noahic flood. A cataclysmic geologic event of untold proportions with earthquakes of such an incredible magnitude, nothing could remain standing during it. Everything would be moving at high speed. That's what we see that's what would happen during the flood, and that's what we have physical evidence for. The Earth is covered with an average of 1,800 meters of sedimentary strata with fine, distinct boundaries. You see these? They're produced in the laboratory. Since 1952, approximately 7 papers proving this point, that fast-moving water creates sedimentary strata with extremely fine, distinct boundaries that coincide with the law of lateral horizontality, the geological law of horizontality. Are produced and published every single year since 1952. Scientists understand how strata are formed. They've been doing it in the lab for 50 years. Okay, this is what we find throughout the geologic column. Most of the strata in the Earth have fine, distinct boundaries. This is not possible to be produced over vast periods of time. I want you to see how fine the boundary is between this material. Volcanic ash mixed with clay, between clay layers right here. Do you see how incredibly fine those boundaries are? One material abruptly ends and the next begins immediately. Now, if long deposition were true and the flood didn't happen, then the layers would have been produced by materials slowly coming in over vast ages of time for various directions and angles. And what you would have is a gradation of materials from one type of material into the next over a long period of time. The materials would gradiate, like the gradation in a pair of sunglasses. You've seen them. They're darker at the top. They get lighter as you go down. That's what we would see in the geologic column, but that's not what we see in the geologic column. It takes rapid inundation by fast-moving water to separate particles by density and grain size. So the materials are separated so clearly that you have one type of material directly on top of another material with a paper-thin boundary between them. That can only happen with rapid inundation, and it's been proven in the lab since 1952. The entire geologic column is comprised of sedimentary strata that look very much like what you see on the screen now. Not all of them, but the majority of strata in the geologic column going down 1,800 to a mile or more meters is just like what you see in the screen. That's impossible if those materials were deposited over a vast time. It can't happen. Only rapidly moving water. So this means the entire geologic column was produced by rapidly moving water, and one strata below is no older or younger than the one above. Minutes to hours, maybe days, a couple of months, but it cannot be that there was thousands of years. In conclusion, it is impossible for anyone to squeeze thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years in between these sedimentary strata, because the boundary between them is paper thin. It cannot happen. Do you see that? It is impossible for uniformitarianism to be true. Now, since the Earth is covered with vast amounts of this stuff, we know the flood was global. There are 5 major megasequences that span the continents. The same series of strata are found on all the continents. The Zuni, the Navajo, Coconino, Tepites, Redwall limestone, Mixia, Mithil, Permia-Quixa, the Tippecanoe, the Kaskaskian, the Sauk. They cover the various continents, verifying that those sediments were laid down at the same time globally. That means the entire Earth was globally flooded. So, in conclusion, the scientific evidence for the Noahic flood, that the Earth was globally flooded by water that was rapidly moving during a geologically outrageously cataclysmic event that produced fine distinct boundaries would have a virtual absence of erosion and bioturbation in between them, is a scientific fact. If we could say anything is evidenced in science, the flood of Noah is a fact. I haven't even mentioned tongues in the geologic column, materials that rapidly were forced in between strata that are allegedly millions of years old, and solid rock. But solid rock doesn't bend. But this did. When that material got squeezed out through it like a pimple, it bent the strata that was coming through. But according to uniformitarianists, that stuff there would be solid rock. But solid rock doesn't bend. It breaks. So how'd that happen? Well, that could be explained by the geologic column being produced by the Noahic flood, and still all of it soft and moist, because there was no time for it to concrete in the stone. In conclusion, the scientific evidence from the Noahic flood is beyond overwhelming. You can continue to deny it, but the scientific evidence is beyond overwhelming. And that concludes my opening statement.
All right, with 3 seconds to spare, so perfect timing, Neff. Now we are moving on to David Neff. It is your 5-minute uninterrupted rebuttal. So go ahead whenever on your first word, I guess, or whenever you're ready. I'll start your timer. So go ahead.
Excellent. And can you share my screen? Because I do have a very short presentation for my rebuttals.
You're good. You're good.
Let's see here. Slideshow. Okay, excellent. So geology, can it be explained by the flood? First off, I want to say thank you to NephilimFree for your opening presentation. And I do really appreciate that you stuck to only a few points and not a million different points. So I do appreciate that very much. I knew you were going to do the geology route, but I wasn't quite sure which part of geology you were going to be talking about. So I just did a general rebuttal and some of the fatal flaws with flood geology. Remember the philosophy of science and the issues of falsification. What should we see if and only if my hypothesis were true? And conversely, what should we never see if and only if my hypothesis were true? So what I'm saying basically is if the global flood happened, what should we never observe in geology? So I'm going to bring up 3 major points: radiometric dating, the Oclo natural nuclear reactor, and paleogeography. So we all know radiometric dating is, of course, a way to date samples based upon the known rate of decay for a particular isotope. We have done this throughout the geological column. We have dated Mars, we have dated moon rocks, all presenting a roughly the same age. Now, if and only if the flood hypothesis were true, then we should see every single layer of the geological column being the same radiometric age. This is not what we see at all. what we actually see is that throughout the world, the Jurassic period is within the usual range, and we can do that throughout pretty much the entire world, geological column. You would find that the age of a Jurassic rock in Australia is the same as you would expect it to be in America. This is only possible if and only if the global flood never happened. Next is the Auckland Natural Nuclear Reactor. Now, in 1972, and sorry here, I'm going to change this as I was saving quickly when I was presenting my PowerPoint. Wait from current slide. So, the Auckland Natural Nuclear Reactor. Now, in 1972, during the height of the Cold War, there was a depleted uranium found enough to make 6 nuclear bombs. And this is simply not possible under a 6,000-year-old planet. If and only if the flood happened, then we should never expect to find the Auckland Natural Nuclear Reactor. There sets a minimum age of the Earth to be 2 billion years old. Again, if and only if the flood happened, we should never find this. Final point is paleogeography, which NephilimFree accepts. He brought up that we can look at the geochemical signatures in one area and correspond them to the next. And what we found is with the movement of the Indian continent, it moves at about 26 to 36 millimeters per year, and actually started as part of Gondwana near modern-day Mongolia, and it collided with Eurasia about 55 million years ago. And we know exactly where India started from and the speed at which it was going by looking at paleomagnetism and volcanic and chemical signatures that match perfectly with what we would expect under uniformitarian actualism. So if and only if the global flood occurred, then we should never find what we find here. So with that, I rest my case, and that concludes my rebuttals.
All right. Thank you, Neff. With 1 minute to spare, so we will, as always, throw that into either the discussion or the Q&A. So, gentlemen, that concludes the first part of this debate. I want to say great job to the both of you on your openings and your rebuttals. We are now moving into the open dialogue portion. Now, the goal, as always, is to keep it cordial, keep it respectful, also as equally timed as we can. And best to focus on one topic at a time. So since David just completed his rebuttal, why don't we hand it over to NephilimFree? If you want to start off the discussion with a question or a couple points, go ahead. The floor is yours, gentlemen.
Okay. Yeah. Well, David, I would hope that you would investigate. Evolutionists always run to dating methods as they're empirical. But, a number of secular mainstream scientists have admitted that geological dates for things are weeded. And they get a dozen. The reason it's called radiometric dating is because they get a range of dates whenever they date something. And they pick the one that aligns with evolution theory or uniformitarianism the most and discard the rest. A number of scientists who are secular have admitted this to the chagrin of their peers. Their peers hate them for making this admission publicly, and the public is never told of that. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but radiometric dating is not empirical. There's all kinds of assumptions and problems with that. We could talk about that for an hour, but I would ask you if your ideas of uniformitarianism true and the flood didn't happen, you have to be able to answer this critical question, which is why I centered my opening discussion on it, is how in the world are you going to squeeze thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years in between the strata of the Earth, because they have fine, distinct boundaries where one type of material abruptly ends and the next material is deposited directly on top of it. Wouldn't you agree that if a material, if there were tens of thousands of years to each strata, that the material are being flooded by a local rain, and this material floods in from this direction. Next year it floods in from that direction. You would have a mixture of materials, and they would gradiate going one to the next. There wouldn't be a paper thin, fine, distinct boundary from one strata to the next. If like demonstrating, like the laboratory experiments demonstrate happen rapidly in university laboratories. Can you explain to me, please, why is it possible for thousands upon thousands of years to explain each strata, and yet the boundary between the two types of materials be paper thin? How does that happen over a vast age of time? You have to be able to tell me that for your ideas to be believable.
Excellent. So I want to begin by, you brought up a couple points here addressing the issues of radiometric dating. So this is basically based on the decay law, the decay constant, and we can do a mathematical formula for this. And we can use isocron dating to make sure that there was no material leaking in or leaking out of the sample. The way that we actually do it is by doing the mathematical formula. Now, everything in science has a margin of error. Radiometric dating is no exception. And of course, as we all know, everything in science has to be calibrated. When I'm in science class and I am doing a lab and I'm asked to weigh a particular sample, the first thing that I'm going to do is calibrate the scale that I'm using. So, as you rightly said, that there is a margin of error, and there is a mathematical formula that we use. And so let's say that by doing the mathematical formula, the result is 16,000 years. So the result will be 16,000 years plus or minus the standard deviation rates for the margin of error. And what we usually find is that in the margin of error, that when we test the sample with multiple dating methods, what we usually find is that all of the results, or most of the results, is well within each other's margin of error. So that's what I'll say on that. There are, of course, issues with contamination and other things as well, but we can take that into consideration, again, by using isocron dating and by making sure that the sample was taken good care of. And again, that's why we use multiple methods for each sample in that regards. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll let you give you enough time to punch it out.
Okay. Could I screen share something real quick, SFT, for just a moment, please?
Go right ahead.
You might want to study this information about isocron dating. It's not coming up. Let's see. There it is. Yeah, because I don't, you think these things are empirical evidences. They're not. I want to share two thoughts with you. E.H. Andrews, professor of materials, University of London, head of Department of Materials, Queen's College, said in a book, God, Science, and Evolution, he said this, and I quote, "Whatever the figures arrived by the dates, they are weeded out before publication in science journals if they do not accord with the preconceived dates assigned to the evolutionary geologic column." And then Richard L. Mauger, associate professor of geology, East Carolina University, in his paper, Potassium Argon Dates, etc., stated, this was way back in 1977. It's not like this is news. He said, in general, dates in the correct ballpark are assumed to be correct and are published, but those in disagreement with other data are seldom published, nor are discrepancies fully explained. So when I tell you that dating methods are not empirical and that they produce a range of dates and they pick the one, it works like this. Hey, Bob, how old do we think that fish is? Well, that fish went extinct 172 million years ago. Okay, do we have any dates around it? Well, we got one date for 150. That's the one. Pick that one, publish that one, throw the rest out. That's how it works. I know you don't want to believe that, but that's how it actually works with dating methods. They pick the date, they get a range, and they can vary anywhere from 10 million to 100 million years, and they pick the one that fits their there's all kinds of dating problems. Problems with dating, assumptions about the materials and the parent-daughter isotope being coming and going in water because of water and rock. Rocks are porous. Unless it's obsidian, which is basically natural glass, water goes into it and water comes out. It takes minerals with it and takes minerals out. But you haven't addressed the key issue. The key issue is that the Earth is covered with an average of 1,800 meters, in some places 6 miles deep, in other places almost none, but an average of 1,800 meters to a mile of sedimentary strata. The vast majority of them have a paper-thin boundary with one strata upon the other. The boundary is paper-thin, no thicker than a piece of cardboard, and sometimes as thin as onion paper, from one strata. And that strata could be a different type of material. For example, you can have a strata that is almost exclusively clay, largely clay, like maybe 60 or 90% clay. And then right above it, be a mixture of sand and other types of materials. And the boundary between them is paper thin. You can see it. You could put a piece of paper up to it. It's not much thicker. How you haven't addressed how it's possible for those strata like that to be produced by long deposition. You have to admit, can't you, don't you, that each strata was formed exactly as we see the laboratory experiments show that they're formed, which have been conducted since 1952, where in the laboratory we reproduce exactly what we see in the geologic column. Strata with paper-thin boundaries between them, where materials are sorted by moving water by particle size and by materials density. How is it possible that the geologic column represents millions of years when the boundary between the different type strata comprised of largely different types of materials is paper-thin? Because isn't it true, David? I just ask you this question, then I give the mic over to you, and you can take as long as you want to respond. I mean, as long as you want. Isn't it true that if each strata were produced over a period of hundreds, even hundreds, much less thousands of years, that the boundary from one material being available for deposition in the environment and another becoming less available would take place over time? And the boundary wouldn't be paper thin. It would be a gradation of one material becoming less available and another becoming more available. That's nature. That's the way we see materials flow when we have rains come and go and move stuff around. So how do you explain paper-thin boundaries for the vast majority of strata in the geologic column if they were deposited over long periods of time? Can you address that, please?
Sure. Well, again, you're making a mistake by saying, well, we know that not all strata take millions upon millions of years to grow, and we know that certain types of material can form rather quickly. None of that is news to geology.
Wait, can I interrupt you a second? You said can? You said can form, or you mean do form?
They can and do. Can you actually go back to your slide that you had? You showed one of the slides with the thin, paper-thin thing when you were in your opening presentation.
Oh, that's a beautiful photograph. I'd be happy to screen share that. It's
yeah. Can you do that for me and give me the
screen share
name
that.
of the
Let me
location?
pull that up. Yeah, because I mean, there's a million bajillion photographs that I could present just like that, that represent various parts of the geologic column from various locations around the world. This is not what we see in every strata, but this is what we see in probably more than 70 or 80% of the entire geologic column. That's very much similar to what you see on the screen.
Okay, and that is where again? I'm trying to type as fast as I can.
I don't know the exact location. It's not really important where it is. What's important is what you see on the screen represents the majority of strata in the geologic column, no matter where you dig on the Earth.
Okay, do you have a citation for that? You said that this is the majority.
No, I know. We hear this all the time from evolutionists. That's just not true. But if you went and did research, or if you were to take a geology course, you might hear that. But so what I'm hearing right now is a denial of something that's observed by geologists all over the earth. You're going to say that that's not the case, that the vast majority of strata in the earth have a fine, distinct boundary from where one material abruptly ending and another material deposited directly above it. You're actually going to say that's not what we see in the geologic column? Because I'm going to tell you what, the audience is going to go Google, and they're going to Google and say sedimentary strata, and they're going to get 1,000 photographs on their screen. They're going to start clicking, and they're going to see exactly what you see on the screen is true for the vast majority of strata, whether it's found in Canada or Australia or Germany. It doesn't matter where. You really going to go there and say that's not true?
Okay, what?
Are you going to be a geology denialist now?
Well, I'm a biology major, not a geology major, so I'll just get that out of the way. So again, without knowing where that is, I would need to understand. I would at least want to know where it's at, so I can figure out what the geological history of that place is. I would want to know, okay, what type of material is it? What type of mineral is it? What are the radiometric dates? These are the questions that we have to ask. I can't just look at the picture right then and there and just say, aha, this took 5,000 years to form, or this took a million years to form, or 5 minutes to form.
So you're going to debate the Noahic flood, but you don't know enough about the geologic column to know whether or not the sedimentary strata going deep into the earth have this feature or not. That seems to me something basic you would need to know before entering a debate about the Noahic flood. I mean, if you don't even know the general makeup of the geologic column, what are you doing here? I mean, David, let me ask. Let's play a little game. Let's pretend that
let me answer that. Can I answer that real quick?
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Again, I am a biology major, not a geology major.
Well, the flood is a geologic event, though.
No, it is both a biological and a geological event.
That's true.
There are major predictions within genetics that alone refute the entire idea of the global flood. The genetics argument, the only field of science that will ever convince me of a global flood is in the field of genetics. I am a biology major. That is why I am arguing the flood from a biological standpoint and not a geological standpoint. That is why my entire opening argument dealt with biology.
Okay, so I disagree. I think genetics actually does the opposite. But if what I'm showing you on the screen is the case, that the majority of, if even 20% of the strata in geologic column represent what you see on the screen, represents them. But it's much more than that. It's way more than that. If what I'm showing you on the screen is true, it doesn't matter what your ideas about genetics are. It doesn't matter. They can't be true. That's like somebody saying, I believe purple is what's underneath, behind that door. But if when we open that door, we find that, this one thing that proves that what you see as purple is not really purple, it's green. It doesn't matter that you believe there's purple there. It doesn't matter. See, if the strata are produced by, if they have fine distinct boundaries going deeply into the earth, then in the geologic column with all the fossils and your alleged millions of years of this creature evolved and that one came into being, if all of your ideas, if what I'm showing you on the screen is true about the geologic column in general, and it is, then it doesn't matter what your assumptions or ideas or how you interpret this genetic data. It doesn't matter. It can't be true because the geology trumps the genetics. There's assumptions involved in the genetics. How can you assume anything about the geology here? So that's what why I'm driving this home, because I want you to understand the geology tells us the Noahic flood is a scientific fact, regardless of what you assume about genetics or how you can interpret genetic data. The physical evidence is physical evidence. I would still like an answer. How you can squeeze thousands of years between the strata. If you look at the ones at the bottom, you could find a series of strata in the geologic column, David, going down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, which is a mile deep. And look at the bottom of it and the strata down there. the same feature. Clear, fine, distinct boundaries. Sometimes it's not paper thin. Much of the time it is. At the bottom of the Grand Canyon, go all the way through the geologic column to the top of the Grand Canyon, it's the same. A mile of sedimentary strata, that represents hundreds of millions of years in your ideas, okay? But they have fine, distinct boundaries between them. So the entire geologic column has this feature. That's my point. You have to be able to tell me if the flood of Noah, rapidly moving water, as laboratory experiments have been proving in the lab since 1952, according to the U.S. Geological Survey, 7 such papers are published in the secular journals, mainstream sedimentology and geology journals every year. 7 papers every year are published, according to them, that demonstrate what you saw in the photograph, that sedimentary strata are produced rapidly by horizontally moving water, with fine distinct boundaries. That's in separation of one material from another, because if the water is moving fast and it separates one material of one density and particle size from another. You see, the clay is red. Clay has really fine particles, super fine. Clay is super duper fine particles. The materials in the gray is largely ash mixed with other materials, mixed with clay. The water separated them because of their density, because it was moving quickly. The heavier stuff settles first, and the lighter stuff, you see that? You have to be able to explain, David, how it's possible for these boundaries to be paper thin going through the geologic column and vast amounts of time to be present in the geologic column. I would like an answer.
Okay,
I'm going to jump in real quick. I'm going to jump in.
Yes, David has 15, 20 minutes to respond. I know. No, I really want him to. Yeah, because I was a little long-winded there. You know, let David take all the time he wants. You know.
Yeah,
okay.
awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
And I just want to point out, it's going well. It's going very cordial, respectful. Also to the audience, you got some great questions. Make sure you keep tagging me. We've still got over 30 minutes left on the dialogue. So Neff, he brought up some points there, ended it with a question. So David, take as much time as you need. And then if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead. So the floor is yours.
Right, but again, every place has its own unique geological history and its own unique geological figures and data and all of that. So again, I think we should stick to one location, and I think we should talk about the Grand Canyon alone. And I do want to respond to the phylogenetics and genetic stuff. There are no assumptions being made in genetics. We can prove the genetic information that we have. That is not anything that is really up for debates. It's not anything that is really up for discussion in any serious scientific journal. So again, it is genetics that is going to be able to prove a global flood, not geology. Again, I'm a biology major and not a geology major. I do want to ask a couple questions regarding let's kind of just drive this home into the issue of the Grand Canyon. Fossil footprints, because there is an interesting fossil footprint that was actually discovered in 2020. If I can bring up my if I can do my screen, if I could do my screenshot right here. Can you pull this up? So yeah, this was discovered in 2020. This was very recent. Fossil footprints in the Grand Canyon, dated to be about 300 million years old. This proves conclusively this cannot have happened during a global flood. It is simply impossible. A global flood would have destroyed these footprints, would have destroyed the environment necessary to create fossil footprints, especially in the location in which this fossil was actually found. I do kind of want to go and bring it back to the Oklo natural nuclear reactor, because you did not actually answer that question, and I really want you to give me an explanation for the Oklo nuclear reactor. If everything was, if the Earth is 6,000 years old, where did all that enriched uranium go? How did it deplete so quickly? Enough to create 6 nuclear bombs. How does that happen? Can you explain the Oklo natural nuclear reactor? Can you explain how the flood would cause that to form?
Okay, I have to ask you what your last question was, but first, let me address the fossil footprints. Fossil footprints actually support the Noahic flood in two ways. One, for those footprints to be buried rapidly and preserved requires rapid inundation. If those footprints were ever exposed to the Earth's environment for any vast age of time, they would erode away. So when you find fossil footprints in the geologic column, you're looking at creatures running for their lives during the Noahic flood. That's what you're looking at. Or footprints that were made by a creature before the flood, just before the flood had began, or not long before it. Because if you create a fossil footprint by a person steps in mud, which is largely comprised of clay and something else, let's say that will harden, that footprint is not going to sit on the surface of the earth for 1,000 years or 10,000 without eroding away. It's just not going to happen. The erosion is too great. The earth rains, wind, it happens. They're not going to be there. So the preservation of these is evidence of the flood. Also, there are many fossil footprints have been found, some I will say, that show that the animal is moving forward but sideways as it runs forward. That's because it's being pushed horizontally in a fast-moving stream of water while it's trying to climb out of it, and its fossil footprints were buried in sediments that were literally trying to kill the animal. The animal was running for its life. So because the water, the footprints don't go in a straight line forward. They go forward, but at an angle forward, which means the animal is being pushed by a stream of water. See, that could have easily been something that would have taken place during the Noahic flood. So the preservation of fossil footprints supports the Noahic flood. You're not going to have a fossil footprint sitting on the surface of the earth for 1,000 years or 500 years or 10,000 and not erode away. To be preserved, rapid inundation, sealed in sediments that later erode away or dug up by man. Now, what was that last question that you asked? You asked something about, could you please ask that?
Yeah, sure. So the aqua natural nuclear reactor, which proves definitively that the Earth has to be at a minimum of 2 billion years old, enough enriched uranium
Wait,
to create
what produces what proves it, David? I'm sorry. I want to understand your question.
Yeah, the
You're
aqua.
speaking very fast, and I didn't quite catch it. Please say it in a little more.
Okay.
Slow it down just a little, please.
Sure. So let me go really slowly. The Oklo natural nuclear reactor proves definitively.
Well, you don't have to talk slow. I'm not stupid. I just didn't.
Okay.
I just did. You rattled off some names and stuff that I'm not familiar with real fast.
Yeah.
So
the
say it again, please.
So the Oklo natural nuclear reactor proves definitively that the Earth has to be at a minimum of 2 billion years old, and it also proves definitively that the rate of radioactive decay has been constant for at least the past 2 billion years.
So how does it do that, please?
There's enough enriched uranium to make 6 nuclear bombs. That is not possible in 6,000 year time frame.
Can you explain what you mean by that? I'm not sure. That's a little nebulous, what you're saying. There's enough. You mean where? Where is this enough? And what is your idea about how it got there? Because, I mean, that's very nebulous what you're saying. I'm not quite sure I understand. I want to fully understand your statement. You say some kind of a nuclear reactor verifies that the amount of radioactive materials in the Earth somehow discredit the Noahic flood. That's what I'm getting. Can you give a little bit more detail, please?
Sure. Give me 1 minute and I will share my screen. Trying to find my thing.
Because that's a little bit like me saying intertonguing of geological strata demonstrates rapid inundation, the blah, blah, blah. I could do that and somebody said like, huh? What?
Yeah, sure. So let me share my screen. Now you might recognize this from a previous discussion that you had with Jordan, who was very kind for me to lend this to him. So allow me to explain. So the natural uranium being 0.7 enriched would have to be 3% enriched 2 billion years ago. The water plus 3% uranium equals fission. The discovery, 1972, depleted uranium at the Oklo Natural Nuclear Reactor found the fission fragments 2 billion years ago. There was water plus 3% enriched uranium. Conclusion, the Earth must be at minimum 2 billion years old. Go back to the issue of
Okay,
falsification.
David,
Hold
I'm
on, let
sorry
me
to
finish.
interrupt.
I'm speaking.
It's still
I'm
nebulous.
speaking
I still don't.
Nephilim.
I don't understand.
I'm speaking
Okay.
Nephilim.
Okay.
I'm speaking Nephilim. The issue here is the Earth. This has to go back to my original philosophy of science, the whole issue of falsification. If the Earth was young, if and only if the Earth was young, if and only if a global flood occurred 4,300 years ago, we should never, ever, 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 ever find such a natural nuclear reactor. Period. Because again, water plus 3% enriched uranium, enough to make 6 nuclear
Water.
bombs. Period.
Okay, so all I got out of that was there was a lot of water on the Earth, and that would support the flood. But I hate to say it, David. I'm not trying to be mean. I really think that your argument here is stated so. It's stated very poorly, and I'm not trying to be a smarty. I'm really not. It's very nebulous to me. I don't understand. You've left out 80% of the information and pointed out certain little points. And to me, it doesn't flow. I don't really understand. I've got an IQ of over 145, but I don't understand what you're saying here. You know, these disjointed. So I don't understand the argument. If you could explain it in such a way that I understand, I mean, to me, it's like saying coloring books are red. People have green pens. Therefore, the shoes fit the tall guys. That's what I'm hearing. It doesn't follow.
Okay,
I
sure.
don't hear it. Can you elucidate it in a way that makes sense?
Sure. So I'm trying to put it in as simple, as basic as I can. Again, falsification, if and only if a global flood actually occurred and the Earth is 6,000 years old, we
Mhm.
should never find anything like this. The 1972 depleted uranium fission fragments, it would take
What do you mean
2
by
billion.
fission fragments, Don? That's what I want to understand. Okay, that's step one. You
Okay,
say they discovered what you call fission fragments. Is that what you're saying?
so do you know what fission fragments are?
The rocks which show that nuclear fission has occurred.
Okay, so yeah, so the atomic fragments left after the atomic nucleus undergoes nuclear fission. So
Mhm.
effectively, it would have to take 2 billion years to get the enrichment for the nuclear fission, and that's simply because of how the decay works. The uranium-235 is decaying faster than 238. Um, so again, the fission fragments being the isotope are the isotopes which result from the fission. Thank you, Jordan.
Still missing a lot of information. You're really not giving me any details. You're telling me that
So what?
somehow
How much?
there were fission fragments that were found that are allegedly 2 billion years old, and this somehow disproves the Noahic flood. And I'm not getting it.
Um,
It's just too nebulous for me. You're leaving out far too much information.
okay. Well, what information do you want?
Well, something that gives a logical, coherent chain of thought that can be followed.
Okay. So the thought. I guess step number
You,
one is the issue of the falsification. Do you understand? If and only if the flood happened, then we should never observe something. Like you agree that there's some
well,
things that we should never observe if the flood occurred. So that's step one. What should we never observe if a global flood happened 4,300 years ago? So again, this year, there will not be enough time in order to get the enriched uranium that we have. So there was
okay,
depleted.
wait, right there. You're saying there's naturally enriched uranium in the Earth that should not be there if the Noahic flood occurred. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that is correct. Bingo.
Okay, all right. Okay, got that. Okay, so they find uh, um, uranium that is concentrated in the geologic column here and, maybe some way over there, right? In relatively few places, right? Okay.
Just here, the aqua
Okay.
over here in this
So
section.
these scientists found some concentrated uranium in the earth, right?
Correct. They found.
Okay. So now what? Now what?
Okay. So again, the 2 billion years ago, the Earth has to be at least 2 billion years old in order to get the enriched
Why?
uranium that we have.
Why?
Because of the decay law. It's simple mathematics. It's simple physics. It's simple based upon the way of the decay.
So
I
then,
don't
wait, you're
understand.
saying so the material enriches itself? Is that what
Correct.
you're saying?
Can you share the screen again? Um,
Okay, I'm
hold on.
still not getting
Excellent.
it. So
So,
rich uranium is found on a rare occasion here and there in the earth, and this somehow discredits the flood. I guess you're saying, is it right, that if the flood was to deposit the materials in which we find the uranium, we would not find concentrated uranium anywhere in the geologic column? Is that what you're claiming?
yes, that's exactly what I'm claiming. If the
Well,
Noachian flood happened 4,300 years ago, and
so
if the
okay.
Earth was 6,000 years ago, we should never find this. And the reason why she should never find this is because there is not enough time in 6,000 years for this to have taken place.
Okay, so let me ask you this: if there were rocks inside the Earth that had high concentrations of uranium, and God split the oceans open, the ocean floor open, or the continent, and split the Earth, and water ejected at supersonic velocity, creating a column of water that shot through the atmosphere of the Earth, where the water became almost zero viscosity, superfluid. And billions of tons of material from inside the earth eroded out and flooded over the continents, which produced part of what we call the geologic column. The rest of it would be materials that was moved from one place to the left or to the right. So if there were concentrated rocks and materials in the earth that had high concentrations of uranium in them, they were ejected from inside the earth because God split the crust of the earth open and the waters brought them out and dumped them on the earth. That could explain why we'd find heavily irradiated rocks in the earth that have high concentration of uranium. Wouldn't that be possible?
No, it would not be possible because
Why?
well, because if it went faster, you'll be getting this radiation doses much higher than Hiroshima, and of course
Why? That depends on where we find
I'm
it.
speaking.
Oh.
I'm speaking. I didn't interrupt you, so let me finish what I'm saying. If the radioactive decay, if there was decay, and if all of this sped up, um, we would get a temperature of about 22,000 degrees Kelvin, 3 times the surface temperature of the sun, and that is Dr. Snelling's calculation, not mine. And again, that's simply not how fission works. Again, high
Okay,
concentrations
I
of
didn't hear an
uranium.
answer there.
I'm speaking. I'm speaking. The enrichment worldwide is 0.7%. It needs to be 3% enriched for fission to occur. The high concentration of uranium alone will not cause the enriched uranium. It's not about the quantity of uranium. It's about the enrichment. Period.
Enrichment. Uranium enriches itself, you're saying?
What was
How does
that?
that happen when we know it decays? How does it enrich itself?
Okay.
And secondly, we find rocks in the earth that have high concentrations of uranium, obviously. You're telling me that it's not possible that isn't it true that some of that stuff is deeper in the earth? It's likely that some of that stuff is not, 50 meters down, but 500, 5,000, 2 meters, 3 miles down.
Okay,
5 miles down. Isn't it possible that there are high uranium concentrations in certain rocks deeper inside the Earth? A mile down, 5 miles down, 10, 20 miles down? Isn't that true? That's
yeah,
possible, right?
okay, yes, and I understand
Likely,
your point.
wouldn't you
So,
agree that's likely?
okay, possible, but again, the
Okay,
concentration of
so
uranium does not equal
since that's
enrichment.
possible, and since if God split the Earth open and water eroded massive amounts of material, just shot it out of the Earth into the surface of the Earth, couldn't that be an explanation
Nope.
for
And
the
here's
movement?
why this is not an
Hold on,
explanation.
let me ask you a question. Wouldn't it be theoretically plausible that uh, rocks with high concentrations of uranium could be ejected by this process to be on the Earth, surface of the Earth, and then buried by subsequent strata, so that we would find them 10 meters down, 1,000 meters down,
Um,
10,000 meters?
no, that's not.
That,
No,
that's not logically possible to you,
no, it's not, and here's why.
really?
Again,
I
it
think
has
that's
to do.
I think that's
Okay,
disingenuous.
so
That's
here's
not
what I want you to do.
logical.
Here's what I want you to do. I want you to show me the math. I want you to actually prove that a global flood would be able
That's
to
that's
do
not
that.
logical.
And here's the thing, Nephilim
You
free,
just said no to something that's completely logical.
um, because logical does not equal plausible or probable, and it doesn't.
I know you're going to dismiss it because you don't want to believe in the Noahic flood. But what I said is completely plausible. It's completely possible that if the Noahic flood did occur and there were rocks with high concentrations of uranium very deep in the earth, and the Noahic flood occurred, and millions of tons, billions actually, possibly, of tons of materials from inside the earth were shot out of the earth onto the surface of the earth and then subsequently buried by sedimentary strata, we could find exactly what you're talking about: rocks with high concentrations of uranium.
Yeah,
But
if you
you're going to say that's not logically possible. To me, that's completely plausible. And I can't imagine you giving me a logical scenario why that can't be logically plausible.
why can't that be logical, plausible, or probable? Well, because it is
Yeah.
graph right there.
How does the graph demonstrate that what I said, which is completely plausible,
No, it
is
is
not
not plausible.
plausible?
If you want
But
to speed
why?
up, if you want to speed up decay, if you want to speed up all the processes, and if you want to do all that, you're going to have to address the issue of the calculation and the heat problem of
Hmm.
22,000 degrees Kelvin, and you're also going to have to address
I don't know where that
how.
comes from.
Hold on,
Where do you get the number 23,000? See,
hold on 1 second.
I could spit off terms without
Okay,
explaining what
hold
they
on.
mean.
Excellent.
We
So,
find 23,000 Kelvin. Well, I'm a photographer, 56K Kelvin. Oh boy, that proves. You know, proof.
okay,
Yeah, you're
hold
not
on.
proving anything.
Okay,
You
hold
know,
on 1 minute. Let me show you the math that we actually explained this to you. Um,
and you haven't addressed the sedimentary strata. How are you going to find distinct boundaries between the sedimentary strata of the entire whole geologic column with a vast amount of time? Because, man, I'm just going to tell you, if you can't tell me how the geologic column can be produced by sedimentation over vast ages of time, your ideas that the Noahic flood has no scientific evidence or isn't verified, they're all moot. They go in the garbage. Every one of them, they just drop right in. Because you have to be able to tell us how the physical properties of the geologic column of this planet can be produced by your idea of uniformitarianism, because the flood does explain, because it's verified in the lab, has been since 1952, the rapidly moving water sorts different materials according to their density and particle size, and you can see it happen right before your eyes. One material of a different type buried on top of another with a fine distinct boundary. That's exactly what we see in the entire geologic column. You haven't even addressed that. I understand you don't want to address it. Maybe you're afraid to. But if your idea that the flood of Noah never happened and that uniformitarianism is true, you have to be explained why experiments in real, observable, testable, repeatable science in the laboratory since 1952 demonstrates every time that what we see in the geologic column happens rapidly right before your eyes. So you have to tell us why we're to believe that millions of years explain it when science shows us it happens in real time, quick as a blink. I'm not hearing an explanation for why
okay,
geology supports your idea.
Okay, sure. So let's talk about this for a moment. So going back to the issue of the temperature in here, this is the actual math that Dr. Snelling has done and Dr. Snelling himself has published. Here is the math. Here is where I'm going to get the 22,400 degrees Kelvin temperature rise if you want to accelerate nuclear decay in about 600 years. And Dr. Snelling himself says this is equivalent to a temperature rise of 22,000 Celsius, which is, of course, enough to vaporize pretty much the entire Earth. Hold on. So yeah,
But you're not providing the Snelling's conclusion or explanation rebuttal. You're just providing that, if we are to assume all that he's doing is admitting that if we adopt the assumptions of the uniformitarianist, this is what we get. This is how you're misrepresenting what Snelling is saying. I'm familiar with Snelling. I've watched numerous lectures by Dr. Andrew Snelling, a geologist and former employee, geology consultant for the government of Australia. I know all about him, but I'm just telling you what you're doing is grossly misrepresenting his information and making it sound like he admits the flood didn't happen. He's a strong flood proponent.
I'm not
what
saying,
you're leaving out is the assumptions that he's adopting in order to show what the uniformitarianist believes. He has a rebuttal to this. That's what you're not showing.
Okay, such a removal requires
and that's disingenuous.
6 orders of
You're
magnitude.
misrepresenting Dr. Snelling.
Okay, so where's his rebuttal to this? And
you'll have to find it. It's probably in the very same paper that you got that from.
Okay, so here's the thing. So NephilimFree, here's the thing. Dr. Snelling and others accept that they're believe that there was accelerated radioactive decay during the
flood. Right. Many creationists do. Yes.
Okay. And by the way, question: do you accept the accelerated radioactive decay?
I don't know quite enough about it to accept it or deny it. I think the creationist geologists who say that that's probably the case, and physicists who say that that's true are probably right based on the truthity of the other arguments they have. I think they're probably right about that also. So I assume based on the veracity of their arguments from other subject matter that their rebuttals are correct. That's what I think.
But here's the thing. The issue that I am presenting is the heat problem and the heat rise that would have taken place if there was accelerated radioactive decay. Every single creationist
but there's assumptions involved, and you're not admitting that. And you're not admitting that Dr. Snelling has a rebuttal to this.
Okay, where's the rebuttal? Show me the math. Okay, NephilimFree,
I don't have it present.
Show me the math.
Do you have it present? You plucked this out of his work. Why did you pluck this out without plucking out also his response to this?
And what was his response?
Because you're misrepresenting Dr. Snelling. You're trying to make it look like Dr. Andrew Snelling is arguing against his own.
No, I am not. That is not what I'm arguing. That is not what I'm arguing. I am addressing the issue of the heat problem, and Dr. Snelling is not. Dr. Snelling is admitting that if accelerated active radiometric decay happened, that there would be a negative heat problem. He acknowledges this. This is what he is
right, but he has a response to that.
Yes, he does. His response is such removal requires heat dissipation at least 6 orders of magnitude greater than.
And that's what you're not presenting. You're only presenting that he admits that radioactive decay occurred rapidly during the flood. There was an increase, but you're not sharing any of the variables that he discusses as to why this is not an issue for the Noahic flood.
Okay,
nor are you addressing anything geological except this idea, the assumptions involved in radiometric decay, and that's all you're doing. You're not discussing any of the physical properties of the Earth. We're talking about the Noahic flood. Okay, we understand that genetics and all these other things are involved, but what I'm hearing is no argument from geology itself, just from chemistry, from physics, from radioactivity, and from genetics. And I could go head to head with you about both of those subjects, but I brought up something that's fundamental to the flood of Noah, which is the nature of the entire geologic column, and you can't even address that. You've avoided that like the plague throughout this debate. You haven't addressed it. I would love for you to be able to explain to me if the strata of the Earth, the geologic column, were not created rapidly by rapidly moving water. How is it possible for the strata to have fine, distinct boundaries, one upon the other, produced in a laboratory in real time, and then we see the very same thing in through the entire geologic column? You haven't explained to me how it's possible for sedimentary strata to have a fine, distinct boundary if there are millions of years in the geologic column. So where do your millions of years come in? If there are no millions of years, all your assumptions about concentrated uranium in rocks, which I've explained could possibly come from within the Earth during the Noahic flood, and your false interpretations of genetic data is meaningless if you can't tell us the physical reason for believing the flood of Noah is true or not true.
Okay, excellent. Can I share my screen again? So again, every place, again, as I was saying earlier, has its unique geological features and genealogical history. Let me share just one example here. Can you pull my screen up here? I don't know if you can see this, but this is the KT boundary. Let's see here if I can pull up.
It's 4 feet thick here, 2 feet thick there, 1 inch thick there.
All right,
6 feet thick there.
So the KT boundary.
It's not uniform.
So here is the KT boundary. The
yeah, but you know
boundary.
it's 4 feet deep in other places. You're showing a place where it's a couple of inches, but it's 4 feet deep in other places.
That is correct. There is variable sizes,
That's right.
and that is true without everything. Some are bigger, some are the smaller. So what I'm trying to get at here is during the KT period, a comet impact which destroyed, which pretty much caused the dinosaurs to go extinct. Within the KT boundary, there is a noticeable blanket of uranium throughout the Earth, and this radium is very positive evidence that this was caused by an asteroid impact. But again, you gotta understand.
Well, you're assuming that it was caused by an asteroid impact. It could have also been produced 2 other ways. One is that, like I said before, there was iridium inside the Earth, and when God split the ocean, the Earth open, the iridium which was inside the Earth got dumped on the Earth in a particular strata, and that's why we find it. That's possible. So that's one potential explanation. It's a lesser potential explanation.
Okay.
But then there's also there's more than one way of explaining that. If you're pointing to the Chickasaw hole in the Earth in South America, Central America, that is much more likely not, because it doesn't have the features of an impact. Scientists, even secular scientists, some of them have published that this was a false assumption made in the 60s and 70s and 80s, that it's not an impact. It's actually where the Earth burped and blasted out a bubble of gas that came from inside the Earth, mixed with molten material, and spat on itself. That's what it more likely is. Secular scientists are coming around to that, and creationists have been saying it since the 1980s. So that's not, you don't have any impact site. Can you show us this impact site where this asteroid came and brought all this iridium, please?
Sure. So first of all, citation needed. Second point is,
you can find it on your own time.
Sure. So again, citation needed. Iridium is actually a rare element on Earth.
Oh, okay. Citation. Standing for Truth produced a video with an interview with an paleontologist about a week ago on his YouTube channel. He explains it. That'll be my citation. Just to throw one out, because there are others. I've read articles by creationists about the very thing. But just to make it easy for you to find, Standing for Truth has a video on his channel with someone giving a talk about this matter, and he shows scientific references for it.
Okay, 1 second. Impact.
You're not really going to take the time to go find that and look at the scroll through the video right now. are
No,
you?
I'm actually going to pull up
It's an hour long.
ask for evidence for the KT boundary impact in the crater being under the Earth. So guess what I'm going to pull up? Share my screen.
Well, I could also, if I took the time, find mainstream geologists who write in their own papers that the Chickasaw location is not an asteroid or a comet impact. It's likely where the Earth burped. So, I mean,
Okay, can you explain how the Earth burped, what caused that burp to occur?
well, during the cataclysmic event of the Noahic flood, which caused slabs of crustal material to be shoved down into the Earth 600 miles deep and be thousands of degrees different in temperature. I mean, do I need an hour to discuss that? There's a lot to talk about there.
Yeah,
I mean, the geologic rapid cataclysmic geological events of the Noahic flood. That's going to be my blanket response to that.
Okay. Can you share my screen, Standing for Truth?
Yes, just 1 second. So I've got, gentlemen, I've got 5 minutes left on the clock for the discussion. Obviously, I don't want to just cut you guys off, but I also want you both to feel like you've been able to make all your points, say what you want to say in terms of the dialogue. So once we're done with the discussion, we will also end with a few minutes of uninterrupted closing time. So David, let me share your screen here.
Excellent.
Okay.
Well, there is the Yukon Peninsula impact. So what are the pieces of evidence that this was actually a comet or asteroid impact? Well, the first piece of evidence being the iridium layer that is ubiquitous throughout the KT boundary.
It's not big enough.
Big enough. I'm talking NephilimFree.
So what we'll do for the last few minutes of dialogue, let's have David Neff take as much time as you need, make your points. You can end your points with a question, and that way we can shift right to NephilimFree, who can then answer your question uninterrupted, and maybe he has another question that he wants to throw at you. So go ahead, Neff, take your time.
Okay, sure. So as I was trying to say, there's a lot of evidence for this KT extinction caused by an asteroid. The first piece of evidence is, of course, the impact event. The second being the iridium layer that is ubiquitous throughout the KT boundary. Iridium is a rare element on Earth, but not in asteroids and in space. So that is what we would expect if that were to have occurred. So again, we also have quartz crystals and many other pieces of evidence for it. And the dating is precise throughout the entire world. We have literally taken samples from across the world through the KT boundary extinction. We've ran the radiometric dates. They all agree with each other. And again, I would really like to hear his explanation for this. The KT extinction here, iridium is presented only in the boundaries of the rocks, and therefore it was deposited in a single large spike in a very short event. So well-known meteor impact often has fragments of shock quartz and glass spheres, which is exactly what we find. So this is all the pieces of evidence corresponding together indicates that this was caused by an asteroid or comet impact. And there's that.
Okay, if I could screen share.
Go right ahead.
For a second. There's two major problems with what you said. Since the Chickasaw...
Here you go. Good.
Since the Chickasaw site has been published to be where the Earth burped and not an actual impact, you're pointing to this one, which is too small to cause such a global event. Way too small. That's way too small. That's only a few miles across. That's not big enough to cause such what you're talking about. Secondly, do you see how edgy the rings are of the material? Okay. This can't have happened millions of years ago because that would have eroded flat. Erosion happens at way too high a rate for something like this to remain on the surface of the earth, not washed away by time over millions upon 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 millions of years. Can't be there. That's only a couple of miles wide. Okay, the ring is so edgy. Okay, if you want us to believe that that ring of edgy rock has been sitting there for 125 million years or 65 million years, good luck. Because I'm sorry, 65 million years, it's gone. And how do we know? Because we observe erosion take place all over the earth. Mountains are falling, landslides are burying neighborhoods, water is causing local floods. The earth is shifting and washing into the sea. 280 billion tons of material every single year. Now, that's not going to be there for hundreds of millions of years. So that can't be it. It's not old enough, and it ain't big enough to cause a global catastrophe that would wipe out all large animals. It's just not big enough. The most that could do is wipe out all large animals for maybe 100, 500 miles, maybe 10, maybe 1,500 miles. Not global. It's not big enough. And the bottom of it, it's not even caved in. Where did the sediments come? You see the sediments inside the middle of it? Land is already forming inside this thing. And you're going to tell me that this ring of material has been there for 67 million years? I don't think so. In less than that, we got land forming on the inside of it already. I'm sorry, David, a lot of assumptions. I sure would like for an explanation as to how the boundary between the strata of the geologic column can be paper thin. If you believe there's millions of years to be found in the geologic column, I haven't heard you even addressed it. You haven't attempted to. And it's necessary for you to be able to explain that if the flood isn't true. Because we know the flood would create exactly what we see in the laboratory demonstrate, exactly what we see in the earth is verified by the physical experiments performed in university laboratories around the world. 7 such papers are published by the university geologists and sedimentologists every year. And they all have the same data. Sedimentation happens rapidly, produces strata with fine, distinct boundaries. Materials are separated by their particle size and and grain size, by their density and grain size. The geologic column matches perfectly. In conclusion, the geologic column matches perfectly what the laboratory experiments produced around the world since 1952 demonstrate by observable, testable, repeatable science. So what scientific reason do we have to believe that what we observe in the lab, which represents what we see in the geologic column, somehow there's a disconnect? How is it possible for there to be millions of years there? I haven't heard you address it at all. I understand you can't.
Okay, so you know what the size of the crater is?
A few miles in diameter. It's not 40 miles in diameter. It's not 15 miles in diameter. What is it?
It's actually
2.7 or 8.9 miles diameter?
it's actually
12?
it's actually 5.5. Excuse me, not 5.5.
5.
About
Great.
excuse me, 150 kilometers in diameter, 20 kilometers in depth. Let me ask you a question. Hypothetically, how large of a crater would it have to be in order to create a global impact extinction?
Oh,
Neff,
Neff,
here.
are you still there? Neff, your mic might have went out, or your headset.
So you want us to believe that the edginess of that can survive for 67 million years and it be filled in with land in the middle, and that's 67 million years old? I don't think so. If you can't explain that, How is it you're going to explain the sedimentary strata with a fine distinct boundary and the millions? How you can't tell me how this is 67 million years old, 64 million years old, any more than you can tell me how there's 100, much less 25,000 years between the strata, which have a fine distinct boundary one to another. You can't explain it. All you can do is assume, but you can't explain scientifically how it's possible for that material to remain with such an edginess around it for 60 plus million years, when 280 billion tons of continental material are going into the ocean every year. You got a major problem. It's called erosion. It happens so fast the entire Norwegian towns disappear overnight. But you want to tell me this has been here for 67 million years? I don't believe it. I'd like a scientific explanation as how we can have a geologic column by any mechanism except the Noahic flood. The Noahic flood obviously can explain it, and it fits exactly what's reproduced in the laboratory with observable, testable, repeatable science. Hands-on, done science by men in a lab with papers, people looking at it and watching and recording. They see it happen right before their eyes. And what we look at in the geologic column from the bottom to the top of the Grand Canyon is exactly what they make in a lab in minutes. But you want to tell me there's vast amounts of time in between the strata. You haven't been able to tell me how that's possible. Unless you can tell me that all your assumptions about the Chickasaw, now you've moved to this one, which is smaller and can't explain it, and your assumptions about genetics, all these assumptions on top of the geology don't do anything to demonstrate the Noahic flood isn't true if the strata of the geologic column match exactly what the laboratory produces.
Hold on 1 second. So again, every every place has its own unique geological history, so it's impossible to account for every single one of them in the same exact way. Again, the diameter of the impact site is 150 kilometers, which is pretty big. Yes, there has been plenty of course, plenty of erosion and all of that. But again, what NephilimFree hasn't been able to explain yet is the radiometric dating and how what we should predict if we are going to make a hypothesis, a prediction, based upon this hypothesis that when we do a radiometric dating, if everything was laid down during the flood, all of the all the layers, all of the dates should be the same.
Well, here's the biggest problem. You find a big hole in the earth where something hit the earth, and you assume this explains the iridium there. But the iridium could also be easily explained by volcanic activity during the Noahic flood, which would have opened hundreds of volcanoes. I mean, it would have had to have caused hundreds of volcanoes, and I think this explains the ring of fire volcanoes that run from North America all the way around to Asia, down in China, almost China. If the continents are moving rapidly for months at a time, there's going to be so much friction and heat and things opened up in the earth that you're going to have massive amounts of volcanic activity. That would explain the ash layers in the geologic column that happened underwater, most of them, right? But so we could find iridium that way as well. Volcanic activities do bring iridium. Are you aware that volcanism can explain a local layer of iridium in the geologic column? That's been observed. Do you know that?
Sure. I kind of wanted to address that, but first, I want to kind of point out that there's a huge logical issue with your argumentation. Of course, all this volcanic eruption, all of the rapid movement in the plate tectonics, all of this would have created massive amounts of friction and heat, as you admitted. How is anything going to be able to survive all of this chaos, especially the marine organisms? How is it that the flood, being made of wood, didn't completely capsize? Can you
Sure,
explain that?
let me address that. Sure, easily. Uh, Science has proven that the Ark of Noah would be the most stable type of vehicle that can be put on the oceans. A box, which a 6-to-1 ratio of length to width. Been verified by a world-class shipping firm, designing firm in South Korea. In fact, they tested the Ark of Noah, a box, 6-to-1 ratio, found that it's the most stable dimensions and shape of an ocean-going vehicle. You put it in the water, almost impossible to capsize. That's why modern ships, like modern oil barges and whatnot, are built to a 6-to-1 ratio, like the Ark was. So this ridiculous, antiquated, old claim of evolutionists that the Ark couldn't possibly have survived the flood, it would have been capsized, and it would be just rickety, it would have been no good, is a bad argument. You guys should have let that go decades ago, because science has verified that's why modern shipbuilding firms make 6-to-1 ships. That's the best, most stable shape. Now, as for the other, I mean, I'm not hearing any, I'm not hearing a solid argument. All I'm hearing is assumptions, David. You haven't explained to me how geology can explain that the flood of Noah isn't a scientific fact if the geologic column is represented by observable, testable science in the laboratory. You can't explain the millions of years. If the flood, I mean, to everyone it's obvious. Since the strata and the geologic column have these features, and since when they performed sedimentation experiments in the university setting, they produce exactly what we see in the geologic column, it seems, don't get me for making an assumption, that the science done in the university laboratory verifies that the geologic column was made the same way. Now, you're telling me that's not true. I want an explanation as to why the observable, testable, repeatable science conducted since 1952 is all wrong. Can you do that?
I'm going to jump in here real quick, and I'm not cutting you off, David. You can have uninterrupted time to respond. But we are going well over an hour now on the dialogue. It's been engaging. It's been a blast. You guys have been cordial, and I like that you've focused on one topic at a time, touching on a number of important topics. That being said, did you want to start wrapping up your points, David? And then we can go into some uninterrupted concluding statements and then jump into as many questions, because I know there's some after shows. David, you've got an after show. So
Yeah, I'm hosting it. I am hosting an after show. You mind if I post a link to this in the cyber chat? I think you have to make me a
Standing for Truth, did you say that you were hosting an after show too? Or I thought you said something. No?
No, I believe
I'll host one, or somebody else maybe.
Yeah, if NephilimFree wants to host one as well, that's fine. If you guys want to advertise in the side chat, go ahead. Yeah, I'll give you the wrench, David, so you can post it.
Okay,
I guess I'll host one myself.
So after show / birthday party on my channel. It is going to be a fun time. So I guess this probably would be a good place to do some wrapping up and some conclusions, concluding statements. So again, the reason why the flood geology cannot be explained by a global flood is very simple, because the global flood creates very specific scientific predictions if and only if this event happened, and we should never find everything. There are some things we should not find if and only if the flood actually happened. So if and only if the flood occurred, we should never, ever, ever discover something like the aqua-natural nuclear phenomenon. We should never, ever, ever expect to see a clear, consistent dates throughout the geological column. We should see that the Jurassic layer, the Precambrian layer, all of these layers to be the same age. That is not what we see. And again, every single geological place, everything has its own unique geological history. So again, we can't just look at one tiny little place and conclude that it is the same throughout the entire world for most things. But anyway, with that, I think I will wrap things up. And if we want to go into Q&A, I think this will be a good time to do that.
Did you want that to be your kind of wrapping up of the discussion and concluding statement, or do you want a separate time for a concluding statement, David?
I'll do a separate conclusion, but
Okay.
if NephilimFree wants to respond, and then I'll do my closing, and he can do his.
Let's do that because, well, I guess because Nephilim. No, you're right, David. You started, so.
Well, why don't I just call that his conclusion? I give a 2-minute conclusion, and we'd be done with it and go into questions.
It's up to you guys. Typically, because David started, that would mean David, would give the concluding statement first, and then NephilimFree would end it. Is that what you want to do, David?
Yeah, that's fine. I do have something to say as an overall conclusion, but I wanted to address his last point.
Okay, let's do that then. So you just wrapped up the discussion. David, do a concluding statement as long as you want. Then we'll hand it over to Nat for a concluding statement as well, and we'll go into some questions from the audience. So David, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Sure. So what is at issue here is the scientific method and the philosophy of science. The scientific method is, of course, all about falsification, observation, experimentation, predictions, and all of that. The global flood makes very specific predictions of what we should find, but more importantly, what we should never find. Now, of course, I'm a biology major, so I chose to do my opening speech on the issues of biology, which unfortunately we really didn't get to discuss much in the open discussion. We really only got to the geology portion. If we talked about the biology aspect, that will take another 2 or 3 hours alone. But I'm quite satisfied with the material that we covered overall in the open discussion. So again, what should we never find if and only if the flood happened? We should never, ever, ever find the Auckland natural nuclear phenomenon, which I still haven't had any satisfactory explanation for. We should never find the radiometric dates to be consistent. What we should find is that, what we should find is that when we do the radiometric dating, the Precambrian and Jurassic and all should all yield the same age, but that is not what we find. And so with that, that's pretty much, plus the genetic evidence, what we should see in genetics is we should see a most recent common ancestor of 4,300 years ago, which we do not see. We should see humans emerging in Africa instead of the Middle East, which we do not see. We should also see a severe genetic bottleneck in all of our genomes, which of course we do not see. So this is pretty much the case. There's very specific predictions which have been falsified. So with that, I rest my case, and I hope everyone comes to the after show. Standing, you're on mute.
Oh no, it happens to the best of us. So as I was saying, thank you so much for your concluding statement there. David, it's been a great debate. 2 hours has flown by. I can't believe we're at the 2-hour mark. So you guys have kept a solid, lively audience. We've had over 60 the entire time for the most part. So it's been cordial, respectful. You guys touched on a number of awesome topics. NephilimFree, we're handing it over to you for a concluding statement. Take your time. And then we're going to get into some questions. So NephilimFree, the floor is yours. I see you want your screen shared. So here we go.
Okay, I'll be brief. As for mutation, ever since OTA in 1973, 74, 92, 2005, Kimura in 97, 79, and 83, they've all acknowledged that the rate at which genetic mutations occur to the human genome are destructive, overwhelmingly so. And Kimura actually posited that in order to fix this problem for human beings, in order for evolution to be true, A single pair of parents would have to have 4 million offspring, and only 2 of them, the lucky 2, survive in order for that species to continue. That's how destructive the rate of mutation to human beings is. It supports young creation and destroys evolution. There are no millions of years. Mutation didn't bring any species into being. That's not possible according to science. But evolutionists keep harping this myth that mutations design creatures, but they don't. Now, science has verified that in the laboratory. My opponent put forth all kinds of assumptions and speculative interpretations of data, and points to a hole in the ground, which he claims is where the iridium came from. But there's no scientific evidence for that. It's just, look, there's a hole. That's where it happened. What? Okay. Well, so look, there's a horse on the ground. Oh, therefore Napoleon rode a horse in France. Wow, must be true, because there's a horse. I mean, this kind of speculation. You see a hole in the ground. That's what apparently brought all the iridium layer on the Earth. There's a hole over there. Okay, so there's sedimentary strata on the Earth. Therefore, the Noah flood is true. See, that I can assume. I can do that. That's not scientific verification in any way. However, geology proves unequivocally that the Noahic flood is a historical geological fact. I could provide countless. I have a list of 64. I could add that many more to it easily, of geological features of the planet that verify that only an outrageously catastrophic event could explain the geomorphology of the crust and lithosphere of the Earth. But evolutionists shy from this scientific facts, and they run from them, as you did see my opponent do. David ran from this scientific evidence of the Noahic flood with the physical characteristics of the Earth itself, and wanted to talk about instead his assumptions about evolutionist time spans and mutations, and then false interpretations of genetic diversity should be greater in Africa if the out of Africa thing were true. That's the opposite of what we should see. If evolution were true, random genetic mutations create genetic diversity, not limited. So why is he telling us that that Africans being more genetically diverse than other peoples in the world, which are older than other peoples in the world, allegedly by evolution theory, supports evolution? And that's the opposite of what evolution would have us believe. Because evolution by mutation and natural selection allegedly creates continuously genetic diversity. And that's, in fact, how all the creatures of the world came from a fish. A fish crawls out on the land, grows 4 legs, and then you got kangaroos, elephants, bears, and everything else with 4 legs, right? That's a whopping sum of genetic diversity, right? Allegedly caused by genetic mutation and natural selection. But he wants us to believe that we should believe that evolution is true, while the Africans, the alleged earliest tribe of mankind, have the greatest genetic mutation, variability, and diversity than all the others. Something's amiss here. That's the opposite of the theory. The theory, you see how evolutionists deny their own theory to create fabrications of their theory? They take false ideas about their theory and turn them into facts and say, look, that supports evolution. It's like somebody shooting somebody in the head and say, see, that's how brains came into being. Because I can blow somebody's brains out. It's nonsense. Okay. We didn't hear any scientific explanation for how science supports the geology of the planet, but we did hear a creationist explain how observable, testable, repeatable science performed in the laboratory since 1952 creates exactly the very features of the entire geologic column, which verifies there are no millions of years. It happened rapidly, and the fine distinct boundaries and separation of materials in the geologic column verifies the geology performed in that lab. That concludes my statement.
How long are we going to go for the open discuss for the Q&A?
Good question. So what I was going to propose is I am going to put a timer of 20 minutes. Reason why, we've got probably about 100 questions, and we would be canceling all the after shows if we were to get through all of them. So I'm going to put 20 minutes on the timer. Once that timer goes off, we're ending there. So therefore, we'll get through as many questions as we can, because there are some questions that could probably result in a debate all by itself. So here we go. We'll do we'll start with the super chats here and work our way down. A lot of good questions though from the audience. Thanks so much for keeping this fun, respectful in the chat. Very lively chat talking about the discussion today. So great debate, guys. Like I said, we're going over 2 hours. You guys kept it fun. All right. First question is from Sigifredo Sarabia. $10 super chat. I appreciate the support. Question is for Neff. If there really was a literal flood, as told in the Bible, why does it literally mean in Genesis 6:15, the earth was 30 cubits high, with Genesis 7:20, the waters prevailed 15 cubits over mountains / the earth?
I didn't understand the first part of that, 15 cubits high. I don't get that. But the passage says that the floodwaters achieved a height of 15 cubits above the mountains of the earth, which eludes the highest. Now, it's likely that the pre-flood mountains of the earth were no mountain that we would think of today. They're probably very small compared to the mountains of the earth that exist today, which were obviously created by the flood. Even secular geologists admit that the mountains of the earth rose out of water. That's exactly what the flood model posits. So the mountains of the earth today are many thousands of miles.
And if I can cut in real quick, Sigifredo corrected, said the ark was 30 cubits. So if there was a literal flood,
no, the ark was 30 cubits
high.
High, yes. With
Genesis 7, the waters prevailed 15 cubits over the mountain.
Over the mountains. Well, I'm not sure. I still don't understand. That's just how tall the ark was. The ark was 15 cubits high, but the waters prevailed over the mountains because the ark rose. As the waters rose, they lifted the ark off the earth. I think maybe that's what it is. They're not understanding that the waters rising lifted the ark off the earth because it became buoyant as the waters increased, lifting the ark and making it buoyant and rise with the waters. That's the explanation they're looking for.
Okay, I appreciate it. David, did you want a quick response, or do you want me to go right to the next question? It's up to you.
Next question, please.
Okay, so let me pick one here. Question is from Jordan Karim. Thank you so much for your question here, Jordan. Here's one for NephilimFree. Do you have any evidence for the iridium? And I got something blocking this. Iridium, enriched uranium, I believe it's saying, etc., from deep within the earth?
Yes, it's called the geologic column. And the geologic column verifies that the materials that blanket the upper mantle of the earth, what we would call the lithosphere, or the upper crust of the earth, were all produced rapidly. And so whatever we find in them, because we know by observable, testable, repeatable science and the philosophy of science that those strata were produced rapidly, and there's no geologic time that can be measured with any serious increment between one and another going upward through the geologic column, then anything that we find within that geologic column had to have been produced or either it had to have been placed rapidly. It cannot have happened over vast geologic time.
Awesome. Thanks for the response. And David, if you had a response, go ahead.
No response. Just keep going.
No problem. No problem. Okay, so next question is from One Punch Man, and this one is for you, David. Actually, it says question for Neff, NEPH, but I'm guessing based on this question that it's probably for you, Neff, as in NEFF. So I don't know. We'll see. So question, One Punch Man. What do you think about the 3 mitochondrial haplogroups from which all humans descended if Noah's flood was not true? So it's got to be for you, Neff, NEFF, Neff. So go ahead.
So 1 minute. So we need to understand exactly what a haplogroup is. A haplogroup is basically a group of similar haplotypes which share a common ancestor with a single nucleotide polymorphism location. As for how many haplogroups are there, let me just see. Every person has 2 haplogroups from what I understand. Here we go. There are 20 main Y DNA haplogroups, many with sub-haplogroups. So there you go. Falsified. So yeah, there's no 3 distinct clades. So that is completely false.
I appreciate that answer there, David. NephilimFree, if you had anything to add, go ahead.
Uh-oh.
Neff, did you want me to just move on to the next question? Are you Neff, did we lose you? He says tech issues. So what we'll do is we'll go on to the next question. I'll get one for David Neff while NephilimFree fixes the tech issues. So let me see. Lots of questions here for Neff, NEPH Neff. So, okay, here's one from Gavin Hurleyman. Question for both, but we can allow you, David Neff, to answer this one while NephilimFree fixes his tech issues. So, how does the second law of thermodynamics affect the evolution model during the millions of years time frame? Go ahead.
Oh boy! So this question shows an utter lack of understanding of thermodynamics. Even creationists like Sal agreed that the thermodynamics argument is terrible. Thermodynamics really in no way contradicts evolutionary theory.
How's my audio? Is it okay?
Perfect.
Yes, you sound good. You sound
Okay,
good.
swapped headphones. I had an issue. The battery died in my headless, my wireless headset. So I just swapped headsets.
Oh, no problem. No problem. So the question was for both, Neff. So David Neff just gave his response, but the question was, how does the second law of thermodynamics affect the evolution model during the millions of years time frame?
Well, obviously, matter moves towards disorder, not order. I mean, that's observed, testable, repeatable science. Every scientist observes this. We all observe it in our daily lives. But the evolutionist argues that matter organized itself not only into things that are complex, but things that are outrageously specified, complex, and functional, and meaningful, and purposeful. And that's just bizarre. That is a wild, deep mind, bizarre fantasy that contradicts what the scientific observations demonstrate. It is like believing that black is white. It's so bizarre.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Let's move on to the next question here. Question is from Super Chat from Jordan Karim. Thank you so much, Jordan. He's been on the channel. He's had many debates. Actually, he's debated you to Film Free. So $5 Super Chat. I appreciate the support, Jordan. He says, if NephilimFree needs an in-depth explanation of Oklo, he can talk to me anytime. He has my email. I'd be happy to explain it. So he's offering a possible chat on that specific topic in the future next. So let me see. If you'd like to respond, you can, or I can just say it wasn't really a question, just more of a comment. So
I just say that whatever assumptions he brings to the table, I'd be happy to dissect them piece by piece, but he's going to have to show scientifically that each level of his assumptions are supported scientifically.
Okay, perfect. Question for you, NephilimFree, from that one snake related to Snake Was Right.
That can't be true because there's no relation between bats and snakes.
So, question is, can you point me to evidence proving Noah himself as his 3 sons were real, like in ancient myths and stuff outside the Bible?
Oh, absolutely. I could give a lecture about that. History verifies that the earliest nations of the world were produced. Etymologically, they were named after the men who were the sons and grandsons of Noah in the Table of Nations. Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, Aram, Elam. The list goes on. Gomer. I mean, I have an entire talk available on this. History verifies that the oldest nations of the world are named after the grandsons, the children, the grandsons, and great-grandsons of Noah. Now, that wouldn't be true unless the Hebrews had the truth. It's implausible to believe that the Hebrews ran around the world gathering all the myths of the world and then fabricated their own and somehow incorporated them. And then if they had done that, how would they make the myths of this people and that people and that people have the same etymology? See, you can't fix this. It can't be fabricated. Either the history of Noah and his sons rebooting mankind is true or it's not. But if the Hebrews have an accurate account for it, then there's no way to say that the peoples of the earth came up with this etymology and the Hebrews wrote one, because the Hebrews just didn't have commerce with all those people. I mean, it's just not plausible. There's a lot to be said about that.
Thank you for the answer, NephilimFree. David, if you had a quick response, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So Egypt, according to the Bible, in Hebrew, the word for Egypt is Mizraim. Mizraim was one of the sons of Ham, I believe, or one of the who descended from Ham. But anyway, Seraphim, thank you. I knew it was one of them. So the problem here is that we have evidence of Egyptian history well before the time of the Noachian deluge, and that alone could be a whole debate in of itself. But that shows that that doesn't hold any weight whatsoever. Egypt, Egypt. I'm just looking something up, just googling something. A number of names were used for Egypt in ancient times. A popular name for Egypt was Kemet, which means black land. So yeah, that's that.
Hamet.
Yeah, Hamet. Yep.
Okay, well, I will say thank you for the response, David. And as we always do on this channel when I host debates, whoever the question is for, that specific individual gets the last word. So NephilimFree, you can have the last word on that one, and we'll move on to the next question.
Yeah, Mizraim is the grandson of Noah. Ham, the son of Noah. The oldest known name for the land of Egypt is Hamia, and the god they served was Hamet or Kemet. And after that, according to the Bible, Ham had a son named Mizraim. To this very day, the Egyptian people considered themselves the Mizraim people, and they were referred to the Mizraimi by other tribes like the Assyrians and the Babylonians. So it follows logically that the etymology verifies that the men named in the Table of Nations in the book of Genesis, the son and grandson of Noah, are the father and son of the Egyptian people. The assumptions about this happened 3,000 years ago and 3,545, that's just uniformitarianist, evolutionist, secular people playing rubber band. We can stretch it any which way we want to with human history in order to avoid the Noahic flood, like Charles Lyell did when he said, I'm going to destroy the Noahic flood in the minds of everybody, and it's going to take me 30 years to do it, and I think I can accomplish it.
All right, guys. Thanks for keeping this Q&A engaging and fun. Next question here is for Neff. Well, which Neff is the question? David Neff. This one's for you from George Bond. Question for Neff. Why should uranium isotopes come in exactly the same ratios, no matter where they find it in the world? Have people actually tested and proven this to be true of every deposit in the world? Go ahead, Neff.
So this kind of misrepresents, or I guess misunderstands, what I was talking about the Auckland Natural Nuclear Reactor being present with the enrichment. But again, what I'm trying to say here is that when we do the radiometric dating and do the uranium lead and all of that, what we find is generally a consistency within the layers. If you were to date a Jurassic rock throughout the world, you would get generally the same results or the same range of results. And if the flood actually did happen and everything was all at once, we should see a uniform age of the geologic column, which we don't see.
Thank you for that answer there, David Neff, NephilimFree. If you had a response, go ahead.
Genetics demonstrates that the mankind is young. Even secular scientists have argued, now it looks like all the species of the world, and by species, they don't mean, you know, how evolutionists play nebulous games with the word species. A fly can get a different color to its luminosity to its wings and say, oh, look, a new species. But what I mean by species is a fly is a species, a beetle is a species, a dog is a species, a horse is a species. The original creationist in understanding of the word, it was creationists who invented the word species. Evolutionists took it over, and now they play all funny games with it. These species arising like this, speciation as it's called, demonstrates a young Earth creation idea because they're all the same. We can measure the rate at which they mutate and the number of mutations necessary for them to have new structural designs in their body plans, new anatomical features to arise, and you need billions of times more time necessary than what mutations are observed able to do. So the evolution story by mutation is not scientifically possible because the amount of time necessary by mutation to create the features, even one new anatomical feature in the body plan of an organism, is more time than the history of the universe. So it can't be true.
Okay, I appreciate that. Next question here is from Luca. Luca, thank you for the question. This one's for you as well, Neff. Actually, I apologize. David Neff, that was originally your question. Therefore, as we always do, you get the last word on that. So if you had a response to anything NephilimFree said there, go ahead. Floor is yours.
Yeah, sure. So again, science reveals a very different story. There's over 900,000 species of flies alone. And we can actually, again, test the most recent common ancestor, which for humans is about 300,000 years. For cats, 6 to 10 million years. So genetics does not support a young Earth timeline, not in the least bit.
All
So
right,
next,
next.
So can I ask David a question? David,
how long?
what about the numerous scientists who agree now that all the various species of the Earth seem to have arisen at the same time about 200,000 years ago? Are you aware of this discussion in the scientific community?
I am aware of the paper that you are arguing, and the paper that you are arguing that you are citing does not in
It's
any way
more than one.
does not support young Earth creationism, and it bets. And you
I
said
didn't say it did.
went 200,000 years ago, still way too old for the young Earth timeline. So
Yeah,
that
but
could
they
be,
all,
that could be,
if they're
that could
right
be,
though,
that's what I'm talking. That could be a discussion for an entire 2 hours. That
okay,
alone.
yeah,
So
all right.
so yeah. Next question. How long do we have for Q&A? Standing, you're on mute.
Oops, I apologize there. Okay, here's there we go. That was actually the 20 minutes. So let's end it with this question. Let's end it with this question. Where was it? Luca. Question for Neff, as in NEPH Neff. Can you show a layer with a gradual limit?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I don't need to show a layer with a what is meant by, I think, the term gradual limit is somebody's thinking nebulously about the sedimentary strata. The fact is the sedimentary strata have clear, fine, distinct boundaries from one to the other. There are sedimentary strata which gradiate from one to the other, but they're relatively rare. The vast majority of strata have a clear, fine, distinct boundary. It's anywhere from a half an inch to a paper thin for the vast majority of them, going as deep as you like into the earth down to the great unconformity. And that just can't be produced by long deposition. Instead of explaining how it's plausible for a long deposition to explain this, they ask creationists how they can explain the counterpart. I don't need to. We observe in the laboratory that the sedimentary strata are produced this way. This is what we observe in the geologic column. Therefore, science verifies the geologic column was produced rapidly. That's real, observable, testable, repeated science performed for the last 60 years. 59 years, actually.
Yeah. So to respond to that, I don't really understand the question either. But come on over to my after show. Everyone is welcome. And if you want to come over, I can make sure the room is kind of small at first. Jordan is in the back if you want to come in and talk about just the onconatural nuclear reactor. And Dr. Dan is said that he is welcome to. He's probably going to come in and invite you to talk about the bottleneck paper that you're citing. So
I think Dan will do the same thing. He would probably talk about everything but geology.
Well, that's because Dr. Dan is a biologist. He is
I
a
know.
PhD in virology.
Everybody wants to debate the flood, but
Yeah.
not talk about geology.
Yep. Dr.
Well,
Dan is not a geologist, and I'm a
I know.
biology major.
I'm not a geneticist, so I won't be talking about genetics.
Okay. And I
Yeah.
guess that's
And
why
Dan won't be talking about geology. So why should we talk?
all right,
See,
gentlemen.
if I followed this to its logical extreme, why are you here?
Well, because you invited me, and so did Standing for Truth. And I'm a biology major, not a geology major. So if you want to talk about the flood, I feel that genetics is the piece of evidence that would, the only piece of evidence, in fact, that would ever convince me of a global flood is genetics, not
I
geology.
can talk about the genetics, but I'm
And
just
we should do
saying,
that in another time.
if my opponent
All right,
can't
guys.
talk about what I talk about, why should I engage them?
Right. Well, that'll be a whole different topic. But anyway, everyone come over to my channel for an after show. It'll be lots and lots of fun. So everyone, feel free to come on and join. And that's a wrap.
All right, guys. Well, we will consider those your final thoughts, final words. Looks like there's an after show, obviously, on David Neff's channel, and I believe NephilimFree's hosting an after show as well. So thank you so much. Definitely a long debate, but one to remember. 2.5 hours, lots of good questions. Guys, thanks for keeping it fun, engaging, and there you go. So, yes. Anyways, thanks to the audience, and guys, have a good night. Don't party too hard at the after shows. Happy birthday to David, and great job to the debaters. SFT is out.